Good evening. It's time for us to get started tonight, and we are happy to have this opportunity to study together. We are going to be looking first in 1 Kings chapter 14, so you might turn there. We're going to be finishing up just a little bit talking about Jeroboam. We will actually spend a good bit of time in Chronicles tonight. You already know this, but First and Second Kings gives us the stories both of the northern kingdom Israel and the southern kingdom Judah, whereas Chronicles focuses only on Judah. So it will talk about kings from Israel, but basically only as they interact with kings from Judah, from the southern with the southern kingdom. For example, we'll see Jeroboam talked about some in Chronicles, but basically only as he relates to the story of Judah. I have made this chart, and I have used lots of different resources to help me put it together, but what I wanted was a chart that gave me the timelines and kind of showed me when particular people were reigning, you know, if they overlapped and that sort of thing. So I've tried to do a good job of that. It doesn't always line up exactly. Abijah will reign for a couple of years, he will die, and then Jeroboam will reign, but I couldn't get that lined up just right. Maybe I can go back and work on it some more. But if you see any major errors on that, like I got the verses wrong or something, let me know, because I would like for it to be a useful chart for people. At any point where it's not, I hope the dates are correct. A lot of the dates are always guesses. It's the best as far as the information that we have and how it interacts with other world events, but it is helpful from time to time. So we talked about Jeroboam. Now, which I've got them in red and green. That is not really to indicate that the ones up top are red and bad, and the ones of the bottom are green and good. The ones at the top are red and they are bad, but the ones in green at the bottom are kind of intermixed. Is just to distinguish them. So we're going to finish up talking about Jeroboam. Anything I need to say in lead up to that I didn't already say? I can't remember. Okay, so 1 Kings 14. Jeroboam, what kind of king is he? A bad king, right? We don't know a lot about his maybe political maneuvers, but that doesn't seem to be what the writer here in Kings is interested in. In fact, we have seen in verses 1 through 18 that his sons are going to be killed, one of them pretty early on in a peaceful way, and the rest of them on the battlefield and in a dishonorable way. And then we have this description of him in verse 19, the rest of the acts of Jeroboam, how he made war and how he reigned. Behold, they are written in the book of the Chronicles of the kings of Israel. That's not the book of Chronicles that we have. This is some other kind of ancient history source where they chronicled the kings of Israel. But that wasn't inspired and it wasn't preserved for us. Verse 20, now the time that Jeroboam reigned was 22 years, and he slept with his fathers, and Nadab his son became king in his place. Now think about that. How he made war and how he reigned. We get very little information about that in Kings. Basically none in Kings. We will have a little bit of the story in Chronicles of his failure at warfare. But what does that show you about, what does the book of Kings talk about with regards to Jeroboam mostly?
Changed the way worship.
That's exactly right. Yes, he changed the way of the worship. Now that's the thing that mattered to the author of Kings. It's the thing that mattered to the Holy Spirit. It was not his earthly accomplishments, but his spiritual divergence, his spiritual unfaithfulness. And I was reading or listening to somebody about that for a while back, and they said, well, consider that for your own obituary. Well, that's interesting to think about, isn't it? And I guess we could do that with all the kings. Some of the most worldly, prominent, and effective kings were unfaithful spiritually. But the Bible focuses on their spiritual success or failure. There are ways in which the spiritually faithful are blessed at certain times. But Jeroboam has a pretty good length of reign. He seems to be able to extend the kingdom of Israel in different ways. But ultimately, he's a failure as regarded by the writer of Kings. Anything else on the Kings part here? Okay. So we will talk about Nadab at next class, Lord willing. But let's switch over and let's go back to the southern kingdom with Rehoboam. Now, who is Rehoboam? He's Solomon's son. Notice in 21 and this is chapter 14 and verse 21 of 1 Kings. You have this introduction to him, son of Solomon. He was 41 years old when he became king, reigned 17 years in Jerusalem, the city which the Lord had chosen from all the tribes of Israel to put his name there. And his mother's name was Naamah the Ammonitess. So I just want you to consider, Solomon has plenty of wives, right? And the one that will become king, the son that will become king, was the son of a woman who was from Ammon, an Ammonite, who we would assume is not bringing in great spiritual principles into the whole situation anyway. And Rehoboam certainly won't do that faithfully. He won't be faithful anyway. You want to take us through some of Rehoboam here, whether you want to do it here or in Chronicles, whichever one you want us to look at. You want us to flip over to Chronicles?
Well, we can flip over to 2 Chronicles 12.
Yeah.
It's basically the same thing right here as where we are in 1 Kings 14.
And gives us a little more information too. So
a little more. How was Judah doing when we ended last time?
Not good.
Well, the priests seem to have a positive effect on the nation for 3 years.
Yeah, for 3 years they've been doing pretty good, walking in the way of David and Solomon. Is the way it's worded there. So let me read some verses right here, or let me just read the first verse. When in 2 Chronicles 12, when the rule of Rehoboam was established and he was strong, he abandoned the law of the Lord and all Israel with him. Okay, so we just mentioned for 3 years they've been doing good. What happened? They're being blessed by God, I believe, and it starts going downhill after 3 years. What happened?
They just try to depend on themselves.
There's where I want to go. Some people just can't handle success, can they? It's that the word there says established. That word established means fixed. And when people start thinking that their success is a fixed thing, that it's not going to go away, can't be taken from them, they kind of get a little lax, don't they? They stop working, start doing things they shouldn't be doing, and they lose it, don't they? What did I do with my glasses?
they're over there. I got them.
I can't see what I'm reading.
Let me just make one thing while you're looking there. Notice at the end of verse 1, it refers to Israel. In Chronicles, there are a few times where Judah is referred to as Israel, in the sense that Judah was the true Israel, right? They were one with the real king in the Davidic line. They were one where Jerusalem was, which is where God chose. Back in the king's account, it says that, I read where Rehoboam reigned in the place where the Lord chose to put his name, which echoes the language of Deuteronomy 12, that God would choose a place. Well, that's not where Jeroboam's reigning, right? And that's not where they're doing their worship. They're doing it at Dan and Bethel. And so it will refer to Judah as Israel sometimes, but only in Chronicles. In Kings, the distinction is much more clear. And it will never call Israel in Chronicles Judah, but it sometimes does call Judah Israel. I don't want that to be complicated. You can look at verse 6 as well. The princes of Israel and the king humbled themselves. Well, who that's talking about is Judah as well. It should be the true name bearer. Maybe we should think of it that way.
Okay, what I was saying there, people forget where their blessings come from when they start relying on their own self, thinking I know some people that have said, what I have, I got it on my own. And that's not good. And so we need to be sure that we have our hearts fixed to seek the Lord. And that will be mentioned. That's the only way you can overcome the temptation of success, or any temptation as far as that goes. Let's read 2 through 16, I guess. In the 5th year of King Rehoboam, because they had been unfaithful to the Lord, Shishak, king of Egypt, came up against Jerusalem with 1,200 chariots and 60,000 horsemen. And the people were without number who came with him from Egypt, Libyans, Sukkiim, and Ethiopians. And he took the fortified cities of Judah and came as far as Jerusalem. Then Shemaiah the prophet came to Rehoboam and to the princes of Judah who had gathered at Jerusalem because of Shishak, and said to them, Thus says the Lord, you abandoned me, so I have abandoned you to the hand of Shishak. Then the princes of Israel and the king humbled themselves and said, The Lord is righteous. When the Lord saw that they humbled themselves, the word of the Lord came to Shemaiah, They have humbled themselves. I will not destroy them, but I will grant them some deliverance, and my wrath shall not be poured out on Jerusalem by the hand of Shishak. Nevertheless, they shall be servants to him, that they may know my service and the service of kingdoms of the countries. So Shishak, king of Egypt, came up against Jerusalem. He took away the treasures of the house of the Lord and the treasures of the king's house. He took away everything. He also took away the shields of gold that Solomon had made. And King Rehoboam made in their places shields of bronze and committed them to the hands of the officers of the guard who kept the door of the king's house. And as often as the king went into the house of the Lord, the guard came and carried them and brought them back to the guard room. And when he humbled himself, the wrath of the Lord turned from him, so as not to make a complete destruction. Moreover, conditions were good in Judah. So King Rehoboam grew strong in Jerusalem and reigned. Rehoboam was 41 years old when he began to reign, and he reigned 17 years in Jerusalem, the city of the Lord, the city that the Lord had chosen out of all the tribes of Israel to put his name there. His mother's name was Naamah the Ammonite, and he did evil, for he did not set his heart to seek the Lord. Now the acts of Rehoboam from first to last, are they not written in the Chronicles of Shemaiah the prophet and of Iddo the seer? There were continual wars between Rehoboam and Jeroboam, and Rehoboam slept with his fathers and was buried in the city of David, and Abijah, his son, reigned in his place. God's been patient with them for over a year now. They were good for 3 years, and now the 5th year, so that 1 year and whatever in between there, he's been patient with them. I suppose giving them the opportunity to get it right. But they don't. So God allowed Shishak to come up against them, against Judah. Why couldn't the fortified cities stop him? God was with him. The Shishak was innumerable too, weren't they? The people coming against them was just overwhelming. So, what does Rehoboam and his sons do? They gathered together to try to get up a plan to stop Shishak. And that's when Shemaiah shows up. He tells them there's nothing they can do. They can't stop it. Because the Lord said, you abandoned me, so I have abandoned you to Shishak. But They did do the only thing that they could do, didn't they? What did they do? They humbled themselves. They said, the Lord is righteous. What do you think that means?
This is what they deserve.
The righteous judge has found us guilty. So because of that, God was merciful to them, wasn't he? He allowed them to live. And he done that for a reason. They were going to become slaves to Shishak for a reason. To learn a lesson. What was the lesson they were going to learn?
Service. God's judgment would come, and then they'd have to serve and
They're going
be
to learn the
subjected to the
difference between serving God and,
yeah, that's right.
and serving man. They're going to learn that being a voluntary servant is better, it's more profitable, if that's a good word to use, than being a forced servant. That being a voluntary servant that's hard for people, is it not? So Shishak takes everything away from them. I suppose everyone here has heard of someone that inherited a great fortune and lost it. Lost it to doing sinful things. You know, alcohol, drugs, gambling. And I'm just making a comparison there. But when you abandon the Lord, the consequences are not going to be good. I'll let you go with it.
Well, let me just think. So, referring to the 1 Kings 14 passage, and I won't refer back to that very much, but the Chronicles writer does not give us as much on how far they had gone. Right now, I want to come back to the way Chronicles phrases it because I think it's very helpful to think about. But when you go to 1 Kings, this is verse 14, verses 22 through 24. There are several things mentioned. So, verse 23. They built high places, sacred pillars, and Asherim on every high hill and beneath every green tree. There were also male cult prostitutes in the land. They did according to all the abominations of the nations which Yahweh dispossessed before the sons of Israel. So consider this. We are not that far from the dispossession of, we're a couple hundred years, but it's not that long since the dispossession has occurred. And rather than saying, well, we should learn a lesson from that and not engage in that kind of stuff because it brought God's judgment, as soon as the kingdom splits, just basically within a few years, they go towards, we're not just talking about, even in Jeroboam's comparison, like he just views himself as like altering the worship that's going on so they don't have to go to Jerusalem. Rehoboam, who has Jerusalem right there, and has the real priests and the real worship, they're going so far as they've got idols and they've got male cult prostitution. If I understand correctly, the Asherim was part of a fertility religion, and it's a mess, right? So when you talk about doing evil, they have just completely abandoned the whole pattern and really just are kind of leaving God in the rear view. Now, back in Chronicles 12, look at verse 1. What did he abandon? What does it say he abandoned there in verse 1? The law of the Lord. I know several weeks ago, Lonnie had a lesson, what do you call it? Rules. Well, why do you care so much about the law of the Lord? Look down at verse 5. Thus says the Lord, you abandoned what? Me, right? Not the law there. He says you abandoned me. Well, what does that mean? They turned their back on him. So, if we abandon God's law, it's not that we're just forgetting the rules, we're forgetting Him, right? You can't abandon the law without abandoning the lawgiver. If you abandon the lawgiver, what that looks like is abandoning the law. So what I want to say about that is that sometimes people would like to act that we only care about the rules. The rules are just the expression of the will of the one that we love. And so we're committed to the laws because we're committed to the one we love. At least that's the way it ought to be. And so Rehoboam, his problem was not just that he didn't follow the rules, is he didn't follow the Lord. And that's how the Lord calls upon us to follow. But I want you to notice that phrasing there. So you have verse 2, he had been unfaithful to the Lord. Then in verse 5, thus says, Lord, you have abandoned me, so I've abandoned you to the hand of Shishak. There's a couple of passages in the Chronicles that talk about the kind of people that God searches for. So this is 1 Chronicles 28 and verse 8. This is David speaking to Solomon before David dies, before he hands over the reins to Solomon. He says, so now in the sight of all Israel, the assembly of the Lord, and in the hearing of our God, keep and seek after all the commandments of the Lord your God, so that you may possess the good land and cause your sons after you to inherit forever. What are they supposed to be seeking? The law of God. Not forsaking, seeking it. As for you, my son Solomon, know the God of your father, and serve Him with a whole heart and a delighted heart, for Yahweh, the Lord, searches, same word as seeks, He seeks all hearts and understands every intent of the thoughts. If you seek Him, He will be found, but if you forsake Him, He will reject you forever. So David's already laid it out. God is seeking seekers, right? He's searching all hearts. And if you seek Him, He'll be found by you, because that's the kind of person He's looking for, is somebody who's searching. But if you abandon Him, He abandons you. We have a very similar idea over in 2 Chronicles 7. And this is when Solomon is praying at the temple inauguration, installation, all of that. So he says, this is God speaking, if I shut up the heavens so that there is no rain, or if I command the grasshopper to devour the land, or if I send pestilence among my people, or if bad things are happening. Verse 14, and my people who are called by my name humble themselves. Think about that language, humble themselves, right? Think about Rehoboam, the princes of Israel at this moment, humbling themselves, and seek my face and turn from their evil ways. Then I will listen from heaven, I will forgive their sins, and I will heal their land. So what is being taught here is that if we seek the Lord, one, we're seeking His commandments and His instructions, but also that He's seeking us too, that He will be found by us. And if we forsake Him, if we abandon Him, if they did, then they would be abandoned as well. And we see that. Now, this idea of Shishak coming, this is about 925 BC. The idea of Shishak coming and Rehoboam humbling himself is not mentioned in Kings. Kings mentions more wicked stuff, and Chronicles mentions more moments where kings do right in Judah. And this is one of those moments. Rehoboam is not a good king, right? He is a wicked king. But there is a moment where he humbles himself and turns to God, humbles himself and looks for redemption. And I think that would be a powerful message for people who had been coming back from captivity and coming back from a judgment that God had brought. What's the solution here? How do we keep from being completely wiped off the face of the earth? We humble ourselves and we seek the Lord. We don't abandon Him. We don't abandon His laws, because we don't want Him to abandon us. Okay. I think that basically covers what we have with Rehoboam. And then he will reign. I have the dates up here as 931 to 913. It was, 17 years. So, the months and all that are, however much that is. Is that 17? That's 18. But anyway, I don't know why I have it that way. Anyway, it's just Brother Waldron had it that way in his book, so just trust it. And let me say this. Verse 14 of chapter 12 in Chronicles, 2 Chronicles 12:14. And he did evil, for he did not set his heart to seek the Lord. Sometimes I grew up hearing the idea, and maybe I've heard it even recently, the idea that the old law, God didn't care about your heart. All he cared about was whether or not you went through the motions, and that the difference is the new covenant, God cares about what we feel like on the inside. But that doesn't work, because if your heart isn't with it, then what you do won't be with it. And God wanted people's hearts. We read that in the book of Deuteronomy. I think it seems to me like 1st and 2nd Samuel and 1st and 2nd Kings, it's as if somebody had the book of Deuteronomy laying open and a history book of the Kings laying open, and they're just writing the history, looking at the book of Deuteronomy and comparing it. And what was the problem? They didn't give their hearts to the Lord. Okay, anything else from that would be 1 Kings 14, basically the end of 14, and all of 2 Chronicles 12. Anything else?
Yeah. That where you mentioned there that's the part in Kings that's not in Chronicles.
Yes.
About the specifics of what they done. Keep that in your mind, because that's going to come up again here in just a few minutes.
Yes. Let me make mention one other thing that I want to make mention of is the when you're flipping between Chronicles and Kings, my notes are different in both places, and I've got to look at both of them in order to have all my notes in front of me. When you look at them, remember that they took the gold shields that had been there in Solomon's day, and what they replaced them with? Bronze shields. So bronze, not as expensive as gold. Maybe it's got a shine to it, but it's not the same as gold. And so you almost immediately see the glory fading. So you think about the high point of Solomon's reign, building all of these palaces and buildings in the temple and being able to hang gold shields. What do you need gold shields for? For being gold shields hanging on a wall, right? That's what they're good for. And now Rehoboam seems to be trying to keep up that appearance, but they're not gold shields. They're bronze shields now because the glory is fading.
He was made lower.
That's right. That's exactly right. Okay. Anything else on all that? That would be 1 Kings 14 and 2 Chronicles 12. Okay. You want to take us? So now we are going to transition to Rehoboam's son, Abijah. And in Kings, he is referred to as Abijam. So just keep that in mind. Abijam and Abijah are the same people in this situation.
Don't get him confused with the son.
Yeah. So Jeroboam, remember, had the son that died early on because he was pleasing to the Lord and he died a peaceful death. His name was Abijah. And so some people have thought that, Abijam and Abijah, he went by either name, but that the King's writer uses Abijam so we don't get them confused. It doesn't help me much if that's the reason he did that, because I'm getting all mixed up anyway. But let's just call him Abijah or Abijam and just be happy about that. We're talking about the son of Rehoboam, the king that reigned after Rehoboam did. So, good deal? Good.
Well, let me tell you something. When I read the 1 Kings 14 there, I get the impression that they're both dead at the same time. But one of them it reigns 5 years longer than the other.
You're talking about Jeroboam lives 5 years longer?
Yeah.
Yes, that's right.
So that's how then we're going to cover that 5 years in between.
Yes,
there.
I see that.
You kind of get the idea that they're both already dead. When you read this. But
Yeah, that is difficult because because Jeroboam's death is described up earlier in 1 Kings, right? It's kind of like, something's happening and then the King's writer's like, well, meanwhile back in Judah, and then meanwhile back up in Israel. So it's hard. It is hard to keep up with that if we're not careful. So that's a good point.
Look, we'll go to 1 Kings 15 and read the first 8 verses. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
Now in the 18th year of King Jeroboam, the son of Nebat, Abijam began to reign over Judah. He reigned for 3 years in Jerusalem. His mother's name was Maacah, the daughter of Abishalom. And he walked in all the sins that his father did before him, and his heart was not wholly true to the Lord his God, as the heart of David his father. Nevertheless, for David's sake, the Lord his God gave him a lamp in Jerusalem, setting up his son after him and establishing Jerusalem. because David did what was right in the eyes of the Lord and did not turn aside from anything that he commanded him all the days of his life, except in the matter of Uriah the Hittite. Now there was war between Rehoboam and Jeroboam all the days of his life. The rest of the acts of Abijam and all that he did, are they not written in the book of the Chronicles of the kings of Judah? And there was war between Abijam and Jeroboam. And Abijam slept with his fathers, and they buried him in the city of David, and Asa his son reigned in his place. Now then go to 2 Chronicles 13. And do you have something you want to say about all that? About difference?
I will say, if you let's just ask this: if you read just the account in 1 Kings, what would your conclusion be so far about Abijam? What would you say about him as a king? All right, yeah, I would agree with that. So you have several phrases there: walked in all the sins, heart was not wholly devoted, and we'll talk more about the David stuff in just a minute. But I think if your conclusion from 1 Kings, you would say he was not a good king at all. The interesting thing is that Chronicles reports a positive story about him, and sometimes skeptics and critics will use that and say, look, they don't even agree what the king is doing, whether he's a good or bad king. What I want us to think about is this. I think what the chronicler is doing is giving us an instance of Abijah's faithfulness to the Lord. When things go well, this is what it looks like. All right? Because we need to be thinking about the readers of this as being people who have experienced the judgment, right? They've been living in the captivity. What they're looking for are lessons of, is there hope moving forward? So sometimes in Chronicles you will say, well, I didn't think that king was good at all, and yet here's this positive story about him. This might be one of the prime examples of that. I don't think when you read Chronicles, don't walk away with, well, Abijah was a great king. Keep the 1 Kings context in mind. He's not a good man at all, but here's a moment where things go differently. And when you see the reasons why the moment goes differently, it would help a reader who's coming back from captivity and trying to do right moving forward. And it should be helpful to us. Is there hope for us when we're not doing right? Yeah, if we do the things that are necessary when that time comes. Okay, maybe that's helpful. I'm trying to be helpful. If I explain all this now, then I won't have to explain it at all. The rest of the time we're going through the divided kingdom for the next 6 years until. No, I'm just kidding. Okay.
Now I guess we can go down to verse 3. Well, it mentioned there was war between Abijah and Jeroboam. Verse 3. Abijah went out to battle, having an army of valiant men of war, 400,000 chosen men. And Jeroboam drew up his line of battle against him with 800,000 chosen mighty warriors. Then Abijah stood up on Mount Zemaraim, that is in the hill country of Ephraim, and said, hear me, O Jeroboam and all Israel. Ought you not to know that the Lord God of Israel gave the kingship over Israel forever to David and his sons by a covenant of salt? Yet Jeroboam the son of Nebat, a servant of Solomon the son of David, rose up and rebelled against his Lord. And certain worthless scoundrels gathered about him and defied Rehoboam the son of Solomon when Rehoboam was young and irresolute and could not withstand them. And now you think to withstand the kingdom of the Lord in the hand of the sons of David, because you are a great multitude and have with you the golden calves that Jeroboam made for you for gods. Have you not driven out the priests of the Lord, the sons of Aaron and the Levites, and made priests for yourselves, like the peoples of other lands? Whoever comes for ordination with a young bull or 7 rams becomes a priest of what are not gods. But as for us, the Lord is our God, and we have not forsaken him. We have priests ministering to the Lord, who are sons of Aaron and Levites for their service. They offer to the Lord every morning and every evening burnt offerings and incense of sweet spices, set out the showbread on the table pure gold, and care for the golden lampstand, that its lamps may burn every evening. For we keep the charge of the Lord our God, but you have forsaken him. Behold, God is with us at our head, and his priests with their battle trumpets to sound the call to battle against you. O sons of Israel, do not fight against the Lord, the God of your fathers, for you cannot succeed. Okay, here's an account of this battle. Abijam is outnumbered 2-1. And I mentioned just a minute ago, we were already told that he walked in all the sins of his father. That's why I said remember that. And Larson just went through, here's a moment of, sounds pretty good. It says in 14, I think it says his heart was not wholly true to the Lord as David was. And I have written here what was the sins of his father, which you already mentioned that. They built the places of worship to false gods and the fertility thing and all that. And we didn't mention when you said that, though, where did they get those ideas? And it's in that verse. Where did they get those ideas of those false gods? From the people that were in the land when they came in and drove them out. I'm trying to find the place. Remember, they're outnumbered 800,000 to 400,000. And Abijam, he's going to try to appeal to them to keep the fight from happening, I suppose. And maybe he's trying to keep peace. I don't know if he's trying to keep peace or just keep from getting killed, but he appeals to their knowledge of God's promise to David that someone from David's family is going to reign forever, and he calls it a covenant of salt. What do you think that covenant of salt means there? That promise is preserved forever. That's that reign through the lineage of David is going to be forever. And we're part of it now.
Yeah, so it's interesting that he connects him to David, and maybe this would be so you got two things, right? You've got David's name mentioned, and then who else's name do you have mentioned later on in his speech? A couple of names actually, but you've got a covenant that was made with David, and then an agreement or a covenant that was made with what other person? Aaron, that's right. So if you're Abijah and you're trying to make the case for why Jeroboam, I really think that he might even be calling for like a reunification here, and that's not going to happen. We know what's going to happen, but I think that might be the appeal here. But he makes the appeal based on two things that are right things to make the appeal on. I think this is the line that God chose, the line of David, and this is the place, and these are the people who God chose to be engaging in this worship service. I do think it's interesting. Look at verse 9. Have you not driven out the priests of the Lord, the sons of Aaron and the Levites, and made priests for yourselves like the people of other lands? In chapter 11, it kind of looks like they just leave voluntarily, and it may still be that they're leaving voluntarily, but Jeroboam, by his actions, has driven them out. And maybe even by more than that, maybe even with real persecution, saying, look, if you're going to hold to this, get out of here. But at least by his actions, he's been driving them out. And so Abijah doesn't have a bad case to say, you don't need, I love this at the end of verse 12. Sons of Israel, do not fight against the Lord, the God of your fathers, for you cannot succeed. Now, it might seem a little arrogant for Abijah at this moment to say, you're fighting against God when you fight against us, because they haven't really been on God's side either. They've been unfaithful. But at this moment, it looks like there's a recognition that the Lord and the worship and the king line that they have is the real thing versus what Jeroboam has brought in.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. Their kingdom is not from that lineage at all.
That's right. That's right. Did you read all the way through the end?
No,
Okay.
I stopped at
12. Okay. If it's all right, I'm just going to summarize the end of it for just a little bit. So while maybe I'll just ask, while Abijah is speaking, what's Jeroboam and his team doing? They're ambushing them, right? So Jeroboam's not even listening, I don't think. I think he's like, well, if Abijah's going to rant on like this, we're going to surround them. And they do. And when it's 800,000 to 400,000 and 400,000 in your front and 400,000 in the back, you're in bad shape. So what do they do? What does Abijah, and really the men of Judah, what do they do in this circumstance? They cry out to God. They cry out to God. And I love the language in verse 18. Thus the men of Israel were subdued at that time. Not Judah, Israel subdued at that time. And the men of Judah prevailed because they relied on the Lord, the God of their fathers. And Abijah pursued Jeroboam and took cities from him. Bethel? What do we know about Bethel? What's going on at Bethel? Idol worship. The Lord triumphs over Bethel, right? So much for the gods that brought you out of the land of Egypt, as Jeroboam had described them. They've now been defeated by the God who brought them up out of the land of Egypt. And so what I want you to see here is this moment is important in the life of Abijah because it is a moment where he and his people trust, rely, depend on, cry out to the Lord, and they are given salvation. And Jeroboam doesn't recover power during this time. That's what verse 20 says. Now, Abijah will die about a year or so before Jeroboam does. But Jeroboam is going to be brought down more quickly than he would have been otherwise. And I don't know that the rest of his reign will be as good as it would have been otherwise, especially if he had been faithful to the Lord, of course. But yes, that's exactly right. 500,000 of Israel died. So it doesn't tell us how many of Abijah's died. I'm sure there were some, but they're depending on the Lord. So that's
when
protected
Abijah says there that God's leading them in this battle. Is God leading them on account of anything Abijah done? For David's sake.
Yep, that's right. Yeah, when you look back at the king's account, let's flip over there for just 1 second, if you don't mind. I know we got you flipping back and forth, but maybe just bring 2 Bibles next time. Have one open to Kings, one open to Chronicles. It would be great if we had this system that like projected things onto a screen where some numbskull could project the King's passage and the Chronicles passage onto the screen. But noted. I will take that in consideration. Okay. Notice this, that this is 15 and verse 4. So this is describing Abijah as not a good king, but he's not, he doesn't, God doesn't take away the kingdom from them totally. Why? Verse 4, for David's sake, Yahweh his God, the Lord his God, gave him a lamp in Jerusalem to raise up his son after him and to establish Jerusalem, because David did what was right in the sight of the Lord and had not turned aside from anything that commanded him all the days of his life, except in the case of Uriah the Hittite. That is, he allows Abijah to reign and even to raise up a son after him because of David, because of what David, he's preserving the covenant with David. Now, if you look at this, Abijah will have a son, and his name is Asa. Asa is one of the great kings. He will be one of the most reflective of David, even though Abijah was not reflective of David. And God is doing that in memory. He's not making Asa be good, but he was giving more time to Judah as a whole with hopes that there would be a good king because of who David was. Let me make mention of this. In verse 2 of chapter 15 in 1 Kings 15, verse 2, Abijah his mother's name was Maacah, the daughter of Abishalom. All right. Over in 2 Chronicles 15, So that would be Asa's grandmother. Asa's a good king. He doesn't want he doesn't want Abijah. He doesn't want idolatry. And look at verse 16. He also removed Maacah, the mother of King Asa. I think that may be the idea of like a grandmother there, from being queen mother, because she had made a horrid image as an Asherah, and Asa cut down her horrid image and crushed it and burned it at the brook Kidron. Evidently, these queen mothers had quite a bit of power. She was queen mother because she was Abijah's mother, and then she remained in that status when Asa comes to the throne, and then he is so opposed to this idolatry that he removes her from her role and her position, trying to clean house. And so we'll see more of that, Lord willing, next time. Anything else before we close tonight?
Just that when they cried out to the Lord, I done a search on calling on the Lord, and most of those is talking about calling on the Lord during trouble or help from enemies. But is that the only time that we should call on the Lord? We just learned you need to call on the Lord during successful times also.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
Call on his name and thanksgiving.
Very good. Thank y'all very much. See you Wednesday night, Lord willing.
Thanks for watching. If you found this video to be beneficial, please follow us on Facebook or subscribe to our YouTube channel. Feel free to share it with others that you feel like may benefit from it. If you need to contact us, please contact us via email at quinn.church@yahoo.com. Also, if you're in the area, we would love for you to come visit with us at one of our assemblies. Have a good day.